Hey everyone, Steve Whittier, 40 Plus BJJ, and the founder of this group and the 40 Plus BJJ Jiu Jitsu series. Just wanted to jump on real quick. There's a video that circulated a couple times in the group in the past couple weeks. I've been doing some traveling. I was out at the Masters Worlds, been super busy here, kind of getting back in the swing. So I wanted to talk about it because I know it's sort of stirred the pot a little bit with some people, and let me tell you which one it is. So there's an article and an accompanying video. Again, it's in the group, but I'll also repost the link so you can see it. But this is with Professor Gustavo Gasperi, and the title is "Old Man Jiu Jitsu is Nonsense." And basically what he says is there's this trend which he thinks is, basically kind of a ridiculous trend that he's seeing going through the jiu-jitsu community, and he's saying that people are talking about essentially jiu-jitsu for older guys, old man jiu-jitsu, so on and so forth. And what I want to do is, first of all, say I have no problem with Professor Gustavo whatsoever. I'm sure we get along great. But what I wanted to do is talk about where his arguments are located, and then explain where I think, so my guess would be, once we start talking about this, he would locate 40 Plus BJJ as one of these. He would lump my program in. Now, I can't speak to any of the others. I know they exist. I really haven't checked any of them out. I've been doing my thing here for some years, and all I know is what I know. And that's through a ton of experience and a ton of feedback from people, both people I've worked with personally, and then literally thousands and thousands of online followers for many years now. So I wanted to go through his arguments and then sort of clarify where I say, okay, okay with you here, but I think there are some assumptions or some some counters I have to what he's saying. None of this being personal between us, just simply for the betterment of jiu-jitsu community and the people that I want to make sure I serve. But I want to dispel some of the arguments that he has as they pertain to 40 Plus BJJ, because that's all I can really speak to. So Gustavo basically comes on and he is talking about old man jiu-jitsu's nonsense. These people are telling you, stop relying on your athleticism, right? And maybe he saw some of my stuff where I talk about the importance of not relying on athletic attributes, because you will see me say some of that, but I need to contextualize it and I need to elaborate on that. So if you were just reading headlines or kind of skimming, you wouldn't get the full picture. And then he says, I'm trying to maintain as much movement as I can through my jiu-jitsu. Why would I want to slow down? Why would I want to basically, limit myself in what I can do and atrophy? I want to continue to move as much as I can through all these movement planes, be as limber, as mobile, as flexible, as strong as I can, doing what I can for as long as I can. So he admits that, age does catch up and there's some things you can't do in your 40s, 50s, 60s that you could do in your 20s, but he wants to do as much as he can. So he's basically saying, if these old man jiu-jitsu people are telling you, just do this slow, steady pressure, like not really using your body too much, then why would you want to do that? You're basically just talking yourself into being old, and you're not using your body to its maximum potential for as long as you possibly can. And he also says jiu-jitsu is an exercise, so we should be trying to maintain our strength, our coordination, flexibility, mobility, so on and so forth. Again, I can't speak to other programs, I can only speak to mine. So basically, if you pay close attention to what I've been saying for years, I'm somewhere in the middle of where Gustavo's coming down in the argument. So let's first talk about this. I'm glancing back and forth because I didn't jot down some quick notes. So let's talk about use of physical attributes, okay? My position has always been, regardless of your age, to take those out of the equation as much as possible during your training, okay? So what do I mean by that? This has nothing to do with what you can do. It has to do with your technical development, okay? So what I've always talked about when I talk about not relying on athleticism. Okay, never said don't ever use it. I said don't rely on it, because whenever you are trying to prioritize non-physical attribute-based training, you are essentially making deposits into the technical bank account of your jiu-jitsu development. Let me kind of come over, like he had some supporting points, and I do feel these are a bit of false analogies. So, for instance, on this same argument, he says, why get an expensive sports car? Why get the Ferrari or the Lamborghini or something like that? Because later on, you won't have the reflexes to be able to drive them fast. And so why even bother ever having those things? Or, why throw crazy parties, have a blast when you're younger, have, amazing sex with your girlfriend, significant other, what have you, because you won't be able to keep up that pace when you're 80. Well, okay. First of all, there's nothing to preclude your enjoyment of those different things in life at those times, just like there's nothing to preclude your enjoyment of jiu-jitsu relative to where you're at all your different ages. So that's not really that analogy doesn't particularly fit. But also we're talking about something that is, when we're talking about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, we're talking about grappling, which means things that you're literally doing with your body under load, right? Load of somebody else's physical body mass, using those attributes, things like that. So it doesn't entirely match up on the physical side either, okay? So let me make the point about non-attribute-based training, okay? And again, this goes for people that are in their 20s or their late teens or what have you, but it becomes more indispensable the older you get, especially if you're coming to the table as a newer student in jiu-jitsu. You have not been training for years and years before you begin, and you're already close to 40 or in your 40s, 50s, 60s, so on and so forth. And then it becomes more important, because a lot of times you're coming to the table already with maybe from past injuries, wear and tear from past athletic events, things like that. You're going to come to the table already maybe a little jacked up in some areas before you even begin. So how much strength, speed, explosiveness should you be using in your training? Okay? For me, the answer for anybody of any age is always just enough. Just enough to get the job done with maximum efficiency and effectiveness, okay? But effectiveness never without efficiency, because efficiency means jiu-jitsu is really, they call it gentle art, but really we're talking about mechanical efficiency. We're talking about trying to find the best, most economical way to do something, because that is, after all, even though we have the sporting aspect now where we have athletes competing against other athletes, jiu-jitsu in its purest form was about trying to find a way to solve a problem, often a self-defense problem, against somebody who's physically superior. So if we can't match them on physicality, how could we find the best technical response? Because then we have to rely the least amount on physical attributes, okay? So how much of those things, how much of your physical attributes should you rely on for your jiu-jitsu? Okay, technically speaking, just enough. How much complexity should we be seeking in our jiu-jitsu, right? This gets to the whole, YouTube debate with, being open-minded and really understanding all these different innovations in the art and things like that, versus focusing on fundamentals, which, again, if you follow my material, I distinguish between core fundamentals of posture, pressure, mechanics, things like that, connection, versus just basic techniques, quote unquote, right? A lot of people use this interchangeably. I make a distinction. There's overlap, but they are not the same thing for me and for 40 plus. So I always focus on fundamentals because they're universal and they provide the individual with the greatest amount of freedom to develop their own personal game. Oh, sorry, my light went off. To develop their own personal game around those fundamentals, because everybody thinks and moves a bit differently, okay? So how much complexity should we seek? Again, my answer is always this, just enough. So my friend, Coach Matt Thornton, talks about as simple as possible, but no simpler, right? So complexity is often about accumulation and about knowing as much stuff as you can, and about knowing every different type of game and things like that. And a lot of times that's confused with sophistication. So sophistication is more about depth. It's about really refining your technique, finding what works for you, rooted in core, solid fundamentals, and then making that work for you. And again, my standard there, the apex example of this is, in my opinion, the real greatest of all time, which is Rickson Gracie. Rickson had all the physical attributes you could hope for, especially at the time. I mean, he was like a kind of a prototype of the modern athlete that we see now in MMA and professional grappling. But you know, when it came to his jiu-jitsu, he would not have any experience with some of the modern games that had been innovated from some of the top people at the time, who were winning multiple world championships at IBJJF level and like beating all the other black belts, top black belts in the world. And then, as you know, we know the stories go, but they're not legends, they're actually true. These guys would go seek out Rickson to see what the big deal was, and he would move pretty slowly and without a lot of you know, acrobatics going on whatsoever, and very quickly he would assess from the root, from the core fundamental root of what they were doing from the standpoint of physics, right, from mechanics, and he would use his superior understanding of leverage and connection and things like that to take all those possibilities away from him, the things they were beating everybody else on, right? Somebody had this game and they would enter the fray like having perfected a game to beat that game, so on and so forth. And Rickson didn't care about any of that. He's just like, okay, human movement I understand. I'm going to figure out your roots. I'm going to take them away from you, shut you down. And then, you know, this would happen over and over again with all these different athletes. So to me, that is a great prototype for us to be following if we are concerned with optimal jiu-jitsu development. And that's where we can get the maximum bang for our buck as we age. Although I think that's a great approach, even if you're, you know, 18 years old and starting to enter your athletic prime. So another thing, I for sure never said that you shouldn't remain strong or mobile or you know, flexible or in great cardio or any of that. Listen, there are a few things I can't do now because of some injuries I've had to my neck and my back, and really set me back in my training for some years. But honestly, in a lot of ways, I can do things now physically still in my 40s that I could not do in my 20s even. So I'm always trying to up my game. I don't believe in the limitations of age until they happen, despite my best efforts. So yes, maintain your strength, maintain your flexibility, your mobility, but if you're really interested in the best jiu-jitsu, you also have to understand this. To whatever extent you are relying on your physical attributes, you know, the old man strength I always talk about, like these guys can't beat my old man strength, right? My grips, right? I can use my grips and hold on to their gi and I can slow these guys down and stuff. It's like, okay, you know, grips are important, especially when it comes to high-level competition, things like that, there's no doubt. But, you know, if you're walking around with all these arthritic, taped-up fingers and stuff, you know, you need to learn how to let go more, not how to become more gnarly with your grip strength to some extent. When it comes to just your jiu-jitsu development, when it comes to relying on being super explosive, super fast, being able to fold yourself in half like Gumby and bring your legs up behind your ears to pummel them in when somebody's trying to get on top of you, okay? Those attributes, okay, work on them for the purpose of physical, or try and maintain them or even improve them from the standpoint of physical fitness and in all of its aspects, but don't rely on them for your jiu-jitsu. To me, that is basically, so by definition, the more you rely on attributes is what I'm trying to say, the more you are having to patch holes in your jiu-jitsu technique, right? Because if your jiu-jitsu technique is only as much complexity, only as much energy or strength or what have you to get the job done, then the more that you rely on those things, the more that you are taking away from your jiu-jitsu development, and then at some point when you don't have them, you're going to actually have to learn a new jiu-jitsu. Does that mean I'm telling you not to play certain types of games? No. Okay, I've always maintained that. I've got some, like an article, and I've talked many times in my videos and on my emails and things like that about don't copy someone else's style, right? That's the surest way. In most cases, like once in a great while, you'll strike gold because you happen to have a similar mindset and or a manner of thinking and very similar movement preferences and physical attributes to your instructor or to the famous jiu-jitsu person who you're trying to copy. But in most cases, that will bastardize your training because you're now you think somebody's game is cool and I want to be able to do that, so you start trying to put a square peg in a round hole, right? Focus on fundamentals, develop your jiu-jitsu, but I never said don't do certain types of games. What I have talked about is the caution of, if you continue to find yourself getting stacked, jacked up on the back of your neck, folded up, things like that, you might want to stay away from, for instance, an inversion-based game or a climbing armbar, climbing triangle type of game. To some extent, we can fix some of the issues there on a technical level, but you do, out of the fundamentals that you're training, you do need to be smart enough relative to where you're at in your development, years-wise, skill-wise, rank-wise, all that stuff. You do need to develop a technical strategy that works for you and works for your body, okay? So I hope you understand the distinction there. What I want to do ultimately is I want to have to do more supplemental training because, Gustavo talks about this is a form of exercise. I want to be able to be fit. Well, if you only do jiu-jitsu for physical exercise, if that's the only thing you do, then you will almost 100% of you will develop some real serious muscle imbalances. You'll be anteriorly rotated. You'll have tightness in some areas. Compensation patterns will emerge. You'll get injured just by virtue of that. So I do recommend some modicum of supplemental training to keep yourself mobile and strong as you move, as you get older, whether it's yoga, strength training, metcons, all that stuff, or a combination. It's all great. But in any case, what I want you to be thinking about is the more you develop excellent sense of timing, connection, technical jiu-jitsu, you should be able to start to move less and more efficiently, getting greater results with your game. So you should have to do more supplemental training to stay in, to be able to stay in shape, right, with all the different aspects of fitness. Because, my goal would be I can do jiu-jitsu with people of, like other black belts. Obviously, there's a big thing there. I just, like, I'm not going to go do that with, high-level, top of the food chain, competitive black belt. But I want to be able to train with, like, other black belts and brown belts and things like that, and be able to get in great position using fundamentals and then be able to almost go to sleep because my positioning, my connection is so good, right? That's my goal for my jiu-jitsu. That's a constant process trying to get there. But that means I'm relying as little as possible on anything except technique. But that doesn't mean I might not experiment, play, do some real competitive matches where I wouldn't use some of my speed and some of my explosiveness or things in the right places. I might not ever do a cartwheel pass. I never said to somebody, don't do a cartwheel pass. What I would say, though, is that is not objectively the most efficient way to pass. Okay, it's unnecessary. There are better ways to do it. However, there's a time and a place for everything. And then, if you are doing some really competitive roles, kind of like really testing yourself with your A game, if you are preparing for competition, use whatever physical attributes you have layered on top of your technique, which you have honed through shelving those physical attributes. So I hope that's clear. This is why I say I don't totally disagree with Gustavo. I just feel like, we're somewhere in the middle, and the value system is a little bit skewed for sort of what he's saying. Now, maybe what he's saying completely applies to some other old man jiu-jitsu programs, whatever those are. I've seen some others, but I just haven't actually looked at them to know. But what I'm telling you is what I believe and have plenty of evidence for. The other thing is I have, again, gotten feedback now from hundreds and hundreds of the literally thousands and thousands of online students in addition, all the people I've worked with personally, over the years, as training partners, teachers, and hearing all these things, like I know what people are telling me about their experience, and where the injuries and things like that are coming in. The other thing he says is training and injuries. He's like, I know now. This is Gustavo talking. I know how to do all my tricks and not get injured, and this comes with experience and decades on the mat, so I now understand how to avoid the dangerous positions that I would previously put myself in and cause myself to get injured. And he's like, I've never had a serious injury after purple belt. And well, here is another point, sort of making my point. A lot of our 40 plus crowd is coming in and they aren't a purple belt yet. And they've starting to develop habits, well-meaning, but they've just learning what they're doing in class, or they're trying to mimic, their senior students or instructors or something like that. They're trying to do these games and do these things that aren't a fit for their body. And so when those things don't seem to be working because they're losing and rolling, or they're getting hammered and rolling, then their immediate thing is, they start talking about using old man strength and using physical attributes, and then they just take all the wear and tear that they're racking up as sort of like a badge of honor, like cauliflower ear in wrestlers. And my thing is like, man, you're going down the wrong path. There's a better way here than saying just keep doing it, ignore it, take Advil every day and stuff. There's a better way to approach this. But a lot of these people are coming in and developing these habits and getting these injuries before they have that experience, right? So how can we give them a template for better technical development? So, long story short, yes, continue to work on your mobility, continue to work on your fitness, your strength, all those things. Use whatever you have. If you're in a fight, self-defense situation, for sure, you do whatever you can do. If you're preparing for a tournament, use whatever you have, but make sure that you weren't relying on those physical attributes in your training, or those holes will likely be exploited by somebody who has greater technical development. Take care of your body, right? And if you can do some of these things in training, play with them, experiment, find what works for you. But again, think about, I'm not telling you to play a certain way because you're quote unquote an older grappler. What I am telling you is think about when you cannot play a certain way, what will your jiu-jitsu look like? How much will you have to completely relearn? How many frustrations will you have to go through? Okay, I will love to do, mobility work and inverting my body and moving through these different planes when I'm playing around, when like I'm messing around with grappling with the kids in here, or with my, even playing around with my daughter. But I'm very conservative about when I do those things in training live competitively, because I've already had some of those injuries as a result back in my earlier days, and so I've had to develop technical strategies that are smarter for me. That is what 40 Plus BJJ is all about. I hope that clarifies things, and I'll talk to you guys soon.